All right, so we're back with Dirty Pipe, but I'm starting with some trans parents with trans kids are planning to leave Texas, which I've talked about before, although I think not on this podcast. They passed a law in Texas that if your kid is trans and getting any medical treatment, then everybody involved is legally required to turn them in for child abuse, everybody at the school and the doctor and everybody, because any medical treatment for trans kids is child abuse. And this is a lot like the old days when they would just outlaw being homosexual and stuff. And the pharmacists immediately refused to deliver drugs that have been prescribed to the trans kids because they would be liable now for child abuse. And so the families of trans kids are making plans to leave Texas and find a state that is less hostile. So it's pretty appalling. And I think we can just expect more of this as the far right imposes abortion bans and more similar draconian measures on the South.
It reminds me when Putin made homosexuality illegal in Russia.
I didn't know he did that. And
Yeah,
I didn't know Russian attitude towards homosexuality. Was it legal and then made illegal again?
I mean, there's definitely an anti-homosexual.
Yeah, I'd expect there to be. I know actually that was one thing about the communists is they were the leaders in women's rights. For a long time, that was their big thing. Women are equal in communist countries, but not in you mean capitalist. But I don't know how it is now. Anyway, and then there was an interesting article I saw, a history book about Maria Montessori, who made the Montessori schools, which I've been very interested in. And I was very pleased to read more about it because pretty much I'm doing the same thing at the college level. Her fundamental idea is that you don't need to like lock kids in a prison and abuse them and make them miserable to force them to learn. What you have to do is let them play and they will naturally want to learn and figure things out. So give them like fun toys to play with and fun, interesting projects to work on. And that really worked. And then it talks about her missteps in life, like trying to patent and limit this and make money off it, which kind of turned it into, she originally started doing special education for kids who were like brain damaged and malnourished and stuff, and had enormous success with them and thought that's where she belonged. But she eventually turned into this elite thing where only the rich kids go there, which is kind of the opposite of the original plan. But anyway, I realized this is the whole thing I do in college. When I went to DEF CON and saw everybody having so much fun building stuff, I said, I need my classes to be like that. And that's been a success.
Yeah, I was going to say it's really fun because a lot of rich parents send their kids to Montessori school. And it's always good to remind them subtly that it's really great that they're embracing Montessori, a program designed for children with learning disabilities. Well, the parents love that.
well, and I feel like that's really true of hackers. I mean, most people can't deal with hackers because they don't really pay attention. They don't really do what they're told. They don't bother to hit the deadline. They're always off playing on some weird project you can't understand. And you have to embrace that and let that happen, which you need to treat them more like children, really. They're self-motivated, doing their own thing and not obeying orders to earn money.
Right. I mean, there's not a huge difference between adults and children in terms of psychology, other than adults have a much larger prefrontal cortex. So while children are pretty much all id, adults have a bit more, control over their actions. But the same base motivations are there. I mean, there's not a, we still have emotions. Adults still throw tantrums, even if they hide it better.
Well, I remember when I was in college, they had the textbook would have the chapter and then it would have the problems at the end. And I loved the problems. I would just go to the problems. It would assign 5 of them and I would do all 20 because it was just like a CTF. The problems were the fun part. And other people would complain about their homework. I would sit there doing homework for fun. I said, I must be different than these people.
Right. And then we get into learning styles. And then we realize that, Montessori, well, great, maybe isn't for every child.
Oh, possibly. And I'm sure by now it's out of date and stuff. But I think it has the essential ingredient of embracing play and fun. And not making the students miserable and like beating them and making them sit down and shut up and obey orders.
Right. So the idea behind Montessori is that they have very specific objects in the classroom that the children are designed to play with or work with in order to teach them skills. This is a little outdated. The more modern approach is the play-based learning, where, it's more, kids are encouraged to have fun and play as a form of learning. that incorporates learning, as opposed to having the like predetermined, you are going to be learning about, shapes. So here are shapes you're going to play with.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, and then I kick it off to you. And I don't know if you want to talk about the Linux or you want to talk about your radio thing, which I really want to hear about.
Oh, okay. So let me share. I'm totally not prepared to talk about this, but I'll briefly talk about this really quickly.
Well, you just built it, therefore it should have it on your mind.
Yeah. Well, share screen. So Firefox. Okay, so there's this project. Let me head to it called TinyGS. And actually, I'm there at the moment. It's called TinyGS, and this is Tiny Ground Station. And this uses LoRa. So LoRa, Lima, Oscar, Romeo, Alpha, as the radio protocol. And it works on 433 megahertz, 915 megahertz, and 2.4 gigahertz. And you get different modules to set this up. Anyway, so the way this works is that you have all these ground stations all over the world, mostly in Europe and North America, but we have some in South Africa. There's somebody over in off the coast of Nigeria, but these tiny ground stations pick up LoRa signals coming from these satellites, which are very new. This is a very new idea. The idea is that LoRa is designed as a long-range protocol, and it does like a frequency sweep, a little frequency sweep when it sends data. So it's designed for low power, long range, and it uses frequency sweeps, which makes it somewhat immune to Doppler effects, Doppler shifting. So it's perfect for small satellites. And that's what's being tested right now on CubeSats and a bunch of small satellites, is using LoRa as a protocol. And they need, of course, ground stations. And LoRa modules are cheap. You can let's go over to Amazon. Let's look for a LoRa module. LoRa, yeah, so you can get 2 for $47, 2 for $40. This one's $25. They're not that expensive, but you can use these modules to pick up signals from these newer satellites that are being tested, and then relay the network back to the main hub, which is TinyGS. And most of these satellites, I should mention, are by students and by universities. So this is sort of a newish science project that you can get involved in. And setting this up is ridiculously simple. So you get one of these boards, and it has to be a specific board, and they mention it on the TinyGS website. So at the bottom, you can go to their GitHub page. And if we go there, they'll show all the boards that are compatible. And in fact, you can make your own boards if you really want to get into it. It turns out you can specify the I2C addresses of your OLED and stuff like that. So if you want to do your own board, that is entirely possible, but you can also just buy a board and it's ready to go. And you install it just like a firmware. They have an installer ready to go. You click a button, it uploads the firmware to one of these boards. And then the boards will then automatically go on the internet. They have Wi-Fi built in. So they will connect to your Wi-Fi network, go online, find the nearest satellite that's going to be over your location soon, tune to that frequency automatically, and wait to see if you get a packet. And then when you get a packet, it will show up on the TinyGS website. So if we go to the most recent packets, we can see some stations picked up Norby. Now, I will say that all the satellites right now are working on 433 megahertz. I set up a 915 megahertz and 433 megahertz station, but the 915 is doing nothing for the time being. And yeah, I mean, that's the way it works. And then let me see if I can't.
Need a big antenna? I mean, how can this make it all the way to space?
You don't need a big antenna. So I'm using, well, the antennas that come with LoRa are these small little dinky things.
Yeah.
I did replace mine with a standard 433 megahertz antenna. It's a ground plane, so we can't find it. something like this. So I replaced mine with something like this, and you can make your own ground plane antenna. They're really simple. I've actually gotten one signal from it. One thing that I want to do, and I think it's going to help a lot, is whenever I'm working with weak signals, I always add a low noise amplifier and a bandpass filter. So I will add that, and that should help out a bit too. But you don't need any satellite dishes. LoRa, like I said, is designed for long range, and you can pick it up. And let me go on Twitter and see if I can't find my, like I said, I'm not prepared to really talk about this ahead of time, but
So all you get is like a couple of characters from a satellite, or can you send whole messages or what?
so you can actually send and receive. So if you have a ham license, you can send to the satellites. Though I don't know of any projects utilizing that yet. But you can send to them, you can receive to them, and then these are the antennas I'm using. So the smaller one is 915, and then the bigger one is the 433. That's all I needed. And I've gotten, well, I'm surrounded by buildings. I don't have the best line of sight, but I already got like one packet so far. And the packets that come in are fairly basic telemetry. So you have, pretty, raw hexadecimal data that can be parsed automatically by the TinyGS software, and it'll tell you, what's going on with the packet. So
yep, just a little metadata and a little message.
Little message, little metadata, how much power it has, how much power it's getting, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that's cool.
Yeah, it's very simple to set up. That's all.
I'm glad to hear about it. Yeah. All right. And let's see, do you want to talk about the Linux problem?
There's a big Linux bug again. Yay. So there's Ars Technica has an article written by Dan Gooden, who we've mentioned on this podcast before many times. Thank you, Dan. Dirty Pipe is the newest big Linux vulnerability. And it is a root. It's a root escalation privilege. It's being tracked as CVE 2022-0847. And it was a researcher named CM for all found that some corrupted files cause a bug in the Linux kernel. And yeah, you can use this bug to get root on pretty much any version of Linux that is not up to date. And it's very similar to Dirty Cow, which was a big thing back in 2016.
Have you tried it yet?
I have not tried it yet.
Yeah, because I remember the Dirty Cow sounded great, but it was actually hard to do. And it turned out there was one of them that killed the machine. And the first team we sent to CPTC killed the one all-important machine you weren't supposed to kill that way.
Right. So whenever I'm doing a kernel escalation on Linux, my go-to technique, and this works a charm, is to download all the packages, all the package data. Like you go into apt, download a list of all the installed packages, and then spin up a virtual machine and reinstall the exact same version of all the packages on that virtual machine. And there's like a billion different versions of like Dirty Cow, and I'm sure there's going to be a billion different versions of this one, of Dirty Pipe.
Yeah.
And you try and you find one that doesn't destroy the system first, and then you use it on the real deal. You never go straight to a live environment with one of these kernel escalation vulnerabilities.
Well, you see, that's the kind of education people learn at CPTC.
Yes.
And possibly even before. All right. And then, all right. So there's the Republicans are warning people not to investigate Trump, which certainly seems unnecessary because it seems like Merrick Garland is absolutely not going to do anything. And, in retrospect, maybe that's for the best. I was sort of anxious to see Trump prosecuted, but the problem is we could end up like South Korea, where the presidents, they're running for president, and whoever loses is going to go to jail. And, we don't really want to be in a system where you jail your opponents. Trump wanted to jail Hillary, but he couldn't get it done. And even after all the rotten things Trump has done, it probably would make more sense to let the voters decide how much punishment he deserves Anyway, that's what's going to happen. Apparently, the nobody's going to do much of anything. The only people that might do something is the state of Georgia, where they've got him dead to rights trying to fix the election. But it looks like everyone's going to decide it's too much bother. And maybe in the long run, that'll be better.
Yes, it is problematic to start jailing your political rivals. At the same time, it's also problematic to let your political leaders, have sort of free reign to do whatever they want and not get in trouble for it. So it's a fine line to.
It is. I know. I've been on both sides. It seems to me like I was with Pelosi. The first impeachment was totally not worth it. Trump didn't really collude with Russia the way he would need to do. You didn't really have the goods, and they failed. But the second impeachment was justified. The coup was awful.
The impeachment didn't fail. He got impeached.
Well, it did not result in hurting him any. And by the way, one thing the Republicans said about this, they say if you prosecute Trump, that'll just make him more popular with his base. Those dirty Democrats are abusing him, which is probably true.
Right. And Democrats should not be going after Trump. I mean, if any president or any politician breaks the law, neutral authorities need to investigate and hold them accountable.
And that's what Biden is doing. Biden said, I'm not going to interfere with the Justice Department. We had that under Trump, and I'm not going to do it. So he's going to let Garland do it. And Garland seems inclined to just not get involved. And a lot of people are very, very, very frustrated, but I'm beginning to think maybe that's right. Anyway, so now let's go back to you with the stolen NVIDIA search. I saw this and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it.
Right. Yeah. So NVIDIA, of course, writes drivers for Windows PCs. And they got hacked about a week ago. And along with staff emails and NTLM passwords and all that fun stuff, certs got leaked, certificates. These certificates are used for signing drivers.
Did they dump them so everybody can get them?
No, they are not dumped so everyone can get them. As far as I know, they haven't been dumped publicly. But oh wait, hold on. No. Yes, no, it has been. Wait, no. No, it has not been leaked publicly. However, but crooks do have it, and so it is possible that they can now sign drivers onto Windows machines, which is.
Even though the certificates are expired, you can still use them to sign drivers, which is a highly questionable plan.
Right. So that's what I was looking at. That confused me a second ago. So back in so somebody named, I think, Bill used some expired certificates from like 2011 to sign drivers that are used in Windows, and it worked fine. So. Yeah, this is part of the problem with certificates, and specifically code signing. You can't. A lot of these systems have older software, and you can't have the certificate suddenly not working and the drivers suddenly failing and your system not being able to start up. So if the certificates get leaked, malware authors can use them to bypass the security that they were trying to build. So
yeah, there are so many problems with certificates like that, to key pinning and key rotation and stuff. It's a really clumsy system, and it's not clear that it really does a lot of good.
Right.
All right. Anyway, this one I thought was interesting. I've heard years ago about nebulas in space that have amino acids in them, or amino acid precursors. And so the question is, did life emerge entirely on Earth, or did some of the building blocks come from space? And these guys think the amino acid precursors did come from space, and they can form in cold clouds of gas. And the point is, of course, in those cold clouds of gas, the molecules do not have enough energy to overcome the barriers and bind together, but they can do that by tunneling. And this, of course, caught my eye because that's what I did for my PhD in physics, was demonstrate molecular tunneling, which was new at that time. And so anyway, it is possible to make complex molecules in a cloud near absolute zero in space. And maybe those are the real precursors of life. Although, none of that's been proven yet, but I thought it was pretty interesting.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to point out to the audience, by precursors of life, you just mean the basic building block, not, DNA, RNA.
Right, none of
living,
that.
yeah.
Something much simpler. Like there was this famous story experiment a couple decades ago where they took like lightning and put it in like methane and showed that they got like some precursors of amino acids or something. That was the idea.
Right. It was the Millie
Euler
Earl.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Experiment, but I forget who designed it.
Well, those guys, obviously. The point is, they were trying to simulate what they thought the early Earth was like.
Yeah. Who's buried in Grant's tomb?
That's right.
Right.
And anyway, and this one I thought was amazing. I was not aware that. I know there's a lot of break-ins and a lot of robberies in San Francisco, but what I didn't know is there's actually a lot of lunatics in hospital gowns wearing hospital bracelets, and this guy with blood on him. And this is a common problem in San Francisco. These people that are in hospitals break out and then attack people and break into their houses and stuff. They're getting a lot of that too. So, the public nuisance and crime problem in San Francisco is just way out of control. And our mayor says she's going to do something about it. And our governor says she's going to do something about it. And that would be great. But, my feeling is that only Republicans can do anything about this. Democrats just don't have what it takes. We will see. In New York City and San Francisco, both are notorious around the world for the level of crime. And both of them, their Democratic administrations swear they're going to do something about it. And we shall see. But I think in San Francisco, the mayor has already hit immovable blocks in the Board of Supervisors where nothing she wants can actually be done. And we'll see.
Right. I do want to point out to our viewers that despite the fact that San Francisco does have many problems with crime, and no one's going to deny this, it's not as bad as I've seen it depicted on certain other media. That's just.
Oh, I know. I used to hear that, like, if you watch Fox News, they'll tell you like Portland is in flames and San Francisco is a shambles. The fact is, I live in San Francisco. If you stay out of downtown, it's fine. But downtown really is a mess. And that's where the tourists want to go and see the pretty sights. And there's like junkies on the street and stuff. It's rude. And the guy went through BART a few years ago and showed junkies just shooting up in the BART station. It is ridiculous. Stuff that just should not be allowed at all is just happening all the time around us. And the cops and everybody seem totally helpless to stop it.
Right. And a big part of that problem has nothing to do with politics, but economics. San Francisco is one of the largest, the highest, San Francisco is one of the most expensive places to live.
Right.
And as a result, if you live in San Francisco and you're on something like social benefits, you get a lot of social benefits. And so that creates a big problem for people who are like drug users that just want a place where it's the climate is good enough where they don't have to worry about freezing to death in the winter, where they also get lots of money that they can use to buy drugs. Most people, by the way, on social services are not buying drugs.
Yeah.
But those that want drugs, know the best places to go, best places to get it, and San Francisco is one of the best.
Well, there are places where they accept the drug addicts like Amsterdam, and yet I don't think they create this level of public nuisance. We haven't figured out the right way to cope with these things.
Well, because we're not accepting the drug addicts. I mean, we're not giving them free drugs. We're not, saying, okay, you want to live your life as a junkie? Well, here's a place to live. You can stay off the street. You don't have to buy drugs from notorious drug dealers. We're not accepting them. But
Yeah, well, we should get them off the street from the way they is right now. Is ridiculous. And the same thing in New York City. He says these people are dying right in front of us, and we're not doing anything. This is not right.
Right. We should do something. Absolutely. It's just.
Yeah.
I don't think the Democrats or the Republicans have the right.
Oh, the Republicans have an effective but wrong answer, which is to just throw them in prison and beat them with a club and violate their rights. That's what Giuliani did.
Which is basically just throwing them out of sight and not fixing the problem. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I mean, that's what you get if you don't have a better solution on the Democratic side. You'll end up with a Republican, brutal solution.
Yeah.
So
who knows? Maybe San Francisco will become a Republican stronghold soon.
Well, I think we're headed for a big Republican wave in 22 and 24.
Yeah.
Unless the Democrats actually have a win, like maybe in this thing in Ukraine, somehow Biden comes off as a hero, which right now he kind of is. So we'll see. But I think we are going to have sort of brutal Republican stuff coming up.
Yeah. And once again, I want to remind people who maybe get San Francisco from certain questionable news sources There's actually a lot of conservatives in San Francisco. It's mostly liberals. I mean, I will. There's a lot of liberals, but there's also a lot of conservatives. It's a mixed bag. It's not all, leftist, communist stuff like you might expect if you watch.
There's a bunch of tech multimillionaires that tend to be conservative financially, but I think everybody's pretty liberal socially, and I think almost nobody's Republican. Republican Party is like two lonely people.
I've met quite a few conservatives and Republicans in San Francisco, so they're there. They're making do. It is mostly a Democratic stronghold, but there's a thriving Republican community, and they're accepted in the community, and
yeah, there's a ton of them in Southern California, which is why they can win the state now and then. Well, I think they're if you had a tough on crime Republican running for mayor of San Francisco or something, they'd be pretty strong. They'd have a pretty good chance, I think. Anyway, and the last one is you with orbiting robots.
Yeah, so I thought this was interesting. Let me share my screen again. Share. So Knowable Magazine, I've never heard of them before. They're from the Annual Reviews, has an article written by Kurt Kleiner talking about a new type of robot that's going up pretty soon, designed and operated by NASA. And its goal is to deal with space junk in a new way. Instead of taking down space junk, which is what we've heard of before, which seems expensive and not very practical, this space probe or space satellite is going to go up, rendezvous with ailing or dying satellites and fix them and or refuel them so they can operate again. And I think this is a great idea for dealing with space junk, because if you grab them, you just grab them and come back down. But if you have a robot specifically designed to repair satellites, to refuel them, to give them the ability to deorbit themselves, you can send up one mission to clean up a lot of space junk and get all the non-functional stuff out of orbit, or to get the non-functional stuff working again, which is a huge money saver. So I love the economics of this mission.
I want the real economic solution, which is to make it smaller and self-aware, and where it attacks them and tears them apart and uses it to build more copies of itself, like the
Grey Goo. Yes. So Sam's talking about the science fiction concept of Grey Goo, where a self-replicating matter basically takes over the world and destroys all humanity. Fun stuff.
Well, it could start by destroying all the junk.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we do have a junk problem in space, and engineers are still trying to figure out the best way to deal with it. And by the way, I love this image. You can see the band of geostationary orbits in the center here. You can see things like the mid-orbit satellites, like the GPS satellites in this ring here. And then that giant cluster right above Earth is all the low Earth orbiting satellites.
Yep. I've seen good animations too of all the satellites, and it just is awful. Like thousands of them everywhere. Like it looks like you'd never be able to launch a rocket at all without getting clobbered.
Right. Those are a little misleading. Keep in mind, this is all 3D.
Yeah.
So this looks kind of like almost 2D, like these satellites are going to hit each other, but we're talking about vast amounts of space. So like two of these dots that look like they're right next to each other are actually thousands and thousands of kilometers apart, and they're in 3D. So even though the low Earth orbit is like have all these satellites, a lot of them are hundreds of kilometers apart in terms of just height. So even if they do go right over each other, 2 pixels pass right in front of each other, nothing happens. But with all these, every time we put up a new satellite, the odds of 2 hitting, increase a little bit more. And once 2 hit, they become 1,000 more satellites, which can hit another satellite and another satellite. And pretty soon you have a debris field in space that prevents liftoffs for 5 to 10 years.
Yep. All right. Well, that's it. And we'll be back on Friday.
Yes.